At issue this week, parliamentarians working with foreign state actors. The cross-party parliamentary committee looking at foreign interference says it has seen top-secret intelligence suggesting MPs have knowingly helped countries like China and India by passing on information or trying to influence police, behavior that was perhaps illegal but certainly unethical. The report did not name anyone, but the Conservatives are demanding that happen.
Are you prepared to release those names, yes or no?
No, Mr. Chair.
You will not release the names of members, elected members, operating in the House of Commons. Do you think Canadians have a right to know, yes or no?
Mr. Chair, I think it's important for Canadians to understand that these names are contained in intelligence reports. In some cases, it's uncorroborated or unverified intelligence information.
So, how serious are these allegations? Should the people, in fact, be named? Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Let's bring in our At Issue panelists to talk about it this week. Chantal Hebert, Coyne and Althia Raj. Lots to talk about here and lots of different angles. Let's start, though, with where the Conservatives were today. Andrew, I'll start with you. And that is, should these people that are alleged, and I should make that very clear, alleged to have cooperated with or worked for foreign state actors, should they be named, do you think? And how would we go about doing that?
Well, I don't think it's enough to retreat into this same old talking about a point about how intelligence is not evidence, it's part of a tapestry, uncorroborated, et cetera. The NSI COP, the Committee of Parliamentarians that looked at this, looked at 33,000 documents. They interviewed dozens of top-ranking intelligence and government officials of various kinds. They obviously thought there was enough there to unambiguously include it in their report. They didn't just say this is speculation, this is possibility. They were pretty clear in saying this does seem to have happened. I'm not sure why we would substitute our judgment right off the bat for the committee. So they had the documents, they had the big picture to look at. If they thought it was credible enough to include it and serious enough that they had to include it, I think we should listen. So what are the options? Should the committee have just basically shut up and looked the other way? I don't think that's possible to maintain. They saw what they saw. They had to alert at least the Prime Minister and therefore the public. Having done so, therefore, we can't pretend that they didn't report what they did report. So what do? I've seen it suggested that maybe we should just leave it to the parties to deal with this on their own, quietly shuffle people out of caucus, et cetera. But I don't think that gets us out of our dilemma. We would know who the people were the minute that happened, but we would not know what they were accused of, which means people would assume the worst, and they would have no venue in which to try to clear their name. So I think that's a very unsatisfactory halfway house. I don't see that there's an alternative now that the game is afoot. I don't think there's any alternative but to get it all out, just full disclosure, have some due process thing where people can clear their names and can explain the evidence against them. But I don't think partial solutions or pretending it didn't happen is going to solve anything.
I hear you, but some of that evidence or intelligence, and I get you don't want to have that debate, it can't be made public, presumably. So I don't understand how we would put out all these names and then have the person defend their reputation without being able to talk about some of these things. Chantal.
Well, the problem with half-truths, and I don't mean that the other half is a lie, but it allows you to imagine the other half. Because you don't see it. Right. So, and this is basically what this report has done. It has presented you with a part of the truth and then said, we leave it to your imagination how bad this is or how unbad this is. Right. I understand the problem with releasing the names, and that is that the allegations in the report, even if they are included, are also not all supported equally. So you do have cases where the evidence is probably devastating, and other cases where you're in the area of suggestions. Right. So if you come out with a list, the process of people who maybe got caught in this and have nothing to reproach themselves will make it really hard for those people to kind of clear their names. That being said, I think there are a few steps that seem to me minimal that should be taken. And one of those is, if I were the leader of a party, and if I were the leader of a party that might be in government tomorrow, or in 6 months or a year, I would, at a minimum, want to read the entire report and find out what it says about people in my own caucus. Not to set them aside necessarily, but at least to have a take.
know.
And by
Yeah.
the way, if you do that, you don't only get to read about your party, you get to see the entire list.
Yes.
I know that you're forbidden from releasing what you read, but that does not prevent you from pushing on the government even more if what you see is devastating. It also means that when you do end up maybe having to craft a cabinet, you at least have a sense of the lay of the land. I'm not sure I understand the rationale for Mr. Poilievre to not get the security clearance that would allow him at least to know where his bearings are inside his own caucus.
Well, and particularly because my understanding is he has the security clearance as a Privy Councillor. The only question is, will he sign on to the secrecy oath?
Althia, your take.
I think the number one consideration should be to the actual sources of intelligence. So if releasing the names compromises any intelligence gathering methods, then that obviously is problematic. I think that should be our first consideration. I agree with Chantal. I don't understand why the Conservative leader is refusing to get briefed. If he knew who was named, he could withhold his signature on their nomination papers. It doesn't even need to wait until the forming of a cabinet. He could decide that these people, he does not want them running under his party banner. The other thing is, it's clear from the report that some MPs are not even aware that they are being used.
Yes.
So you would be outing people who are not actually, who are now probably questioning all of their interactions and wondering whether they are one of the individuals named, which I think is another kind of public service that the committee has done, that it's not just that there are some parliamentarians, it looks like from the report, who have accepted money from foreign sources. There's one incident where a former parliamentarian is actually involved in a relationship with a foreign agent that isn't Bob Detchert from 2011, because we knew of that case from long ago, but because the scope is 2018 to 2023. So there are clearly, some crazy examples in here that you would think anybody leading a political party would want to guard against. If I was Pierre Poilievre, I would also be interested in knowing how the Indians were interjecting in the last 3 Conservative leadership races, because that's also in the report. So there are questions that you think all party leaders who can have access to this report should want to be informed about so that they can make decisions. The other thing is, frankly, we should look at the RCMP to see whether or not there are charges that are going to be laid, because it is unfair. I understand a lot of MPs are kind of speculating who is it. They're casting aspersions against one another. But you can't lump everybody in. Like, this isn't like the 1950s. We're not going on a witch hunt to try to find the communists.
Yeah, but I think it could lead to that, and it could also have a chilling effect. I think, could it not? When you're starting to wonder who's around you.
The thing about
thing
about a witch hunt is there's no such thing as witches. There are such things as people who have taken money from foreign powers or taken favors from, and in exchange has provided influence or provided information, or in some cases apparently ratted out their colleagues, gave the information to a foreign power that could be useful for pressuring those colleagues. I think the committee seemed quite clear on the distinction between the members who were unwitting accomplices and didn't know anything about it, had received donations, for example, without knowing anything about it, and the ones who were witting, who did know what they were doing. Again, I don't see what the alternative is. I have not heard a good alternative to full disclosure. For one thing, I'm not sure that anybody should be trusting, the guardians here. If we just leave it to the parties to deal with internally, if we'd left it to the Liberals, Han Dong would still be in caucus. And I think the evidence is pretty clear that he should not be at this point. So I think full disclosure is maybe a bad alternative, but it's the least bad alternative of the ones that I've heard canvassed.
Chantal.
Yeah, well, my problem is with the notion of the RCMP, and I think the RCMP itself has made it clear. For one, they can only access some of the intelligence on the basis that they will not use it for prosecution, i.e. not to make it public. 2, I don't think the bar for someone to be in a caucus, in a cabinet, in a government, or anywhere in the House of Commons or the Senate is the criminal code.
Yes.
I think the bar is higher than that. And the answer, we'll see what the RCMP says, is kind of trying to put the entire issue under the carpet. All of that being said, knowing Parliament as I know it, and knowing how centralized power is, I sometimes question how much confidential information does a normal MP who's not in cabinet have to offer anyone? And you know, this is a parliament, and I'm not singling out the Trudeau government, but this is a system where ministers sometimes don't even know what the PMO wants to make of their own legislation. And so are we saying that someone who sits on the backbench of any of the parties has great confidential information to share? I'm not convinced.
Or great pressure to bear on a whole caucus or a cabinet for an influence to bear. Althia.
Well, doesn't that raise a whole whack of other issues? Like, if what they're guilty of is telling a diplomat at a cocktail reception that their caucus colleagues are really opposed to this private members bill or this motion that's going to come up in the House of Commons, is that something that they should have their reputation sullied for the next 30, 40 years because they will be lumped in as a foreign agent of a government or acting on behalf and being engaged in treasonous behavior? Like,
if they were doing
I think but the problem is we are operating in the dark. We all don't actually know what is in the report. So it is really hard for us to say what should happen because we don't know.
The answer to your question is if they were doing it covertly for cash with a hostile foreign power, yes, their reputation should be. Well, I know, but I said if.
That is not clear in the report.
And that is the problem with the partial truth that was delivered. Is it allows you to go from traitors, they should all be jailed, to cocktail party gossip because this guy has been friendly and maybe he knows organizers in my riding that will bring votes to me. And you are allowed to imagine any of these things.
Yeah, so we're in a very unsatisfactory halfway house now. So the alternatives is we go back to not knowing anything. We put the toothpaste back in the tube.
And we don't know.
We can't do that. Or we go forward and develop a process for winnowing out the serious charges from the unserious, the credibly backed versus the less credibly backed, and draw on the material that the committee saw.
At issue, Conservative pushback. A Conservative MP is facing backlash from his party and his leader for his comments on a Liberal MP's podcast. The Alberta backbencher said he wants more restrictions for abortion and is against gay marriage.
If there's a vote on gay marriage, up or down?
I vote gay marriage down.
Pierre Poilievre said in a statement those positions don't represent the party or himself and reaffirmed his support of both gay marriage and a woman's right to choose. So did Poilievre contain the political damage? How might other parties, the Liberals, use this to their advantage? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, and Althia. I should say before this happened, the Liberals were already pulling out the abortion wedge based on other things and just because they like to do that, but they usually do it during an election campaign. Did Poilievre respond in a way that sort of ends this conversation or at least contains it for now, do you think, Chantal?
I think that he seized the lemon and managed to make lemonade out of it. That up to a point, this was damaging. By the way, if the Liberals found a new momentum to raise the issue, it was because Mr. Poilievre, I think rather foolishly, went and told police chiefs, bragged to them that he would use the notwithstanding clause to get this law and order agenda in, which immediately raised the obvious question, if you're going to be the first prime minister to suspend civil liberties to get legislation, would you use it on abortion, same-sex marriage, etc.? But having had that MP kind of do that damage, I think Mr. Poilievre seized an opportunity to read the Riot Act and to be clearer than he's ever been on both issues. And in the end, I think he should probably thank Mr. Viersen for having given him that opportunity to make an example of him.
Might be a bit soon for that, but Althia, what did you make of how Poilievre
I don't
responded?
think Mr. Poilievre has many thank yous for Arnold Viersen. So Arnold Viersen is like on the far side of the pro-life movement. There are a lot of Conservative caucus members who would like to see the abortion issue reopened, but they feel like gay marriage is done with. It's been legal for 20 years. We've moved past that. So Mr. Viersen is in a particular small group, but he is right when he told Nate Erskine-Smith, the Liberal MP, that he is far from alone withholding these views. About 3/4 of the Conservative caucus are pro-life. And so when the Liberals raise questions about the abortion issue, because it is party policy, Conservative Party policy, to allow backbench MPs to introduce any bill they want on matters of conscience, that if you have an overwhelming majority in the House of Commons and you have an overwhelming majority of Conservatives who feel this way, they could reopen the abortion issue without the blessing of their leader. Mr. Poilievre may try to, convince them behind the scenes a little bit like we saw Mr. Harper do, but a lot of Conservative MPs have decided to move forward with bills regardless of the intentions of their leader, and that is where the doubt seeps in. And that is a struggle that people around Mr. Poilievre are having an active debate about. Because while Mr. Poilievre may say the issue is done with, Conservative policy not to reopen the abortion issue, at the party's convention last September, it narrowly got defeated. I think it was like 47% that they failed to change that policy. It is still an active issue. Pro-life members of the party are the donors, are the door knockers, are the volunteers. They are an important part. And if Mr. Poilievre alienates them, it will be the biggest gift to Maxime Bernier.
Andrew.
Well, I hope we won't fall into this trap yet again of saying it's a terrible scandal for an MP to have a differing point of view from the leader or indeed the party. It's not. It's okay for MPs to have dissenting points of view. It's okay for them to express them. What happens is we've allowed MPs to become so subservient to the leader that the leader feels that, and we encourage this idea, that the leader is responsible for every sparrow that falls and every stray utterance that falls from any MP's lip. And therefore the leader feels he's got to come down like a ton of bricks on any person who strays from the party orthodoxy or from the leader's orthodoxy. I think the appropriate thing, it was certainly appropriate for Mr. Poilievre to say, look, I don't agree with this. I thought it was actually one of his better moments. The statement he put out was the closest thing I've seen to something relatively sincere, relatively coherent, a statement of Poilievreism, if you will. So that's okay. But the notion that you hear being whispered by Conservative MPs and encouraged by us in the media that he should be punished for this and should be driven out of the party or expelled from caucus, I think is a terrible idea. I take Althia's point that it's certainly valid for people to ask their local Conservative candidate, what's your view on this issue, because it may come to a private member's bill. That's fair. But it's pretty clear where a Poilievre government would stand on this. He ran on an unambiguously pro-choice platform for leader. He won a thumping majority. He controls that party through and through. So I don't think there's any legitimate reason to think that there would be a government bill, but it's a valid question about what would happen in a private member's vote.
Last word to you, Chantal, then I gotta go.
A private member's bill does not necessarily get to royal assent. The government does have control over that, and by the way, the Senate still exists, so much as Andrew will dislike that particular argument. But this is the first time in the current incarnation of the Conservative Party that it is being led by a leader that is openly pro-choice. So short of forcing people to leave their convictions at the door, I'm not sure that Mr. Poilievre can say more to be clear on where he stands on this issue.
Okay.
Aaron O'Toole was pro-choice. Sorry, I just want to... Aaron O'Toole was pro-choice.
Okay.
And in fact, Mr. Poilievre's voting record is more pro-life than it is pro-choice.
At issue, interest rate cut. For the first time since the pandemic, the Bank of Canada has cut interest rates. Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem says it's time.
Further and more sustained evidence underlying inflation is easing. Monetary policy no longer needs to be as restrictive. In other words, it's appropriate to lower our policy interest rate.
The government is claiming its budget helped create the economic conditions for this. So could this help the Liberals? Let's bring everybody back. Chantal, Andrew, Althia, who I know you all love this topic, so I don't know who wants to go first. Andrew, why don't you go first? I mean, this is obviously welcome news for Canadians and for people whose mortgages are coming up for renewal over the next 18 months if things continue in this direction. But could it also be welcome news for the government?
Well, it's good news, first of all, for the Bank of Canada, whose credibility had come under some assault. We are the first G7 country to start reducing interest rates, largely because we've made the most progress against inflation. So I think that's very much to the bank's credit. this one interest rate cut on its own is not going to be much benefit to the government, despite its attempts to claim credit for it. I mean, it's a little much for Chrystia Freeland to be saying this at the very week when we find out that the deficit for last year may be not the $40 billion promised just a little while ago in the budget, but something closer to $50 billion. So they can't really claim credit. If you get successive interest rate cuts, remember, there's still at least another, could be another year or so until the election. You might think, well, look, interest rates, the increases in interest rates were part of what sank the government. The question is, does it work in reverse? Do cuts in interest rates benefit? And I'm not sure of that, because I think what happened with those interest rates was it crystallized a lot of other disaffections people had and complaints they had with the government. I'm not sure they're going to forget those now that it's entered their mind, just because interest rates have gone down.
But I wonder, does it change their view on affordability? Like, do they start to think, oh, well, things aren't as bad as Pierre Poilievre, for instance, has said they are because I have money to spend again? I don't know whether they give the government credit for that, but maybe it opens up a window there.
A quarter point in the prime
Not
rate.
yet, not yet.
Well, not yet.
Yeah.
Lots of people are going to be renewing mortgages, not those that had those variable terms, but people who had fixed terms. And when they do, they will find that they're facing a steep increase because they have rates that were negotiated 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah. So I don't think they're going to find much relief in the notion that it's going slowly down by a quarter point. They will still be facing a raise in their mortgage payments. I'm not convinced that most Canadians, when they heard the news, thought, thank you, Chrystia Freeland.
No, I don't think they did either, but she tried. She tried. Althea.
Although it raises questions, like if you're going to take credit for the rate going down, then you should take the blame for the rate going up, no?
No.
I'm not sure why you would want to make that comparison. The Liberals have planned and expected for more than a year now that when they go to the polls, the date is still thought to be fall of 2025, that interest rates will be lower and that Canadians will forgive them and that will not be an issue. I'm not convinced of that. I think I'm probably in the Chantal school of thought there. I think the only thing really that could save the Liberals is if enough voters decide that they really dislike Pierre Poilievre and they decide not to trust him. I don't see how a 3.5% interest rate is really going to make the difference of whether or not the Liberals get reelected. I'm just putting that number out there. I have no idea what it will be come fall 2025.
It's a decent guess. It's a decent guess.
Here, let me call my broker.
No, but I think a better economy is probably better for an incumbent government, even if everyone's tired of them and wants to move on.
But
sure, yeah. Chantal, last point to you.
Maybe so, but I think a better economy also allows you to want to take more risks politically.
That's a very good point.
I still think what happens in the U.S. in the presidential election is harder to calculate in the electoral math in this country than whatever the Bank of Canada does between now and then.
And that's the other thing the Liberals are also banking on. Excuse the terrible pun. Thank you all very much for talking about a topic you weren't super keen on. I appreciate it. That is that issue for this week. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you back here next Thursday, if not before.